I was camping for 6 days alone in a lesser-known national forest in northern Idaho. I was a very frequent camper, and while I'd never been to this exact spot, I had camped in areas around there before. Story 1. The Lake Scream. The first 4 days were pretty standard. No one else showed up, and I spent the days hanging around the campsite, reading, cooking, and walking around. I'd driven about 3 hours from Boise to get here, and the solitude was exactly what I needed after a stressful few months at work. On the 4th night, I had a nice calm campfire going and was trying to stargaze because the sky was incredibly clear when all of a sudden, the silence was interrupted. It sounded like a man screaming at the top of his lungs in the distance. This sent a chill through me and made me freeze up for a moment before standing and looking in the direction it came from. But it was way too dark out to see anything beyond the campfire. The scream sounded far away, but not far away enough to feel safe about it. Like it was maybe half a mile out in the forest, kind of toward where I knew the small lake was. The strangest thing about it though was that was it. It was just that one scream. Then complete silence. It remained silent for the rest of the night. Before going to sleep, I came to the conclusion that it had to be a mountain lion. If you didn't know, mountain lions can sometimes make these disturbing screeching sounds at night that often mimic human screams. Not exactly, but if you don't listen too carefully, you might mistake it for one. Figuring since I'd only heard it once and couldn't really confirm what I'd heard, that's what it had to be. Although, in the back of my head, I knew it sounded different. More human. More distressed. I'm pretty sure I was just coping to make myself feel better and not get too unnerved. I fell asleep and slept through the night without any disturbances. When I got up, I hung around the campsite for a little bit before deciding to go for a walk. By then, I'd fully convinced myself there was no real danger to whatever I heard last night. So I thought I'd walk to the lake to see if I could figure out what it was. Maybe find some mountain lion paw prints or scat or something. Almost right when I got there, I could clearly see something had disrupted the sand on the other side of the lake. I walked around the border, my boots crunching on the rocky shoreline. In the sand was a bunch of random stuff scattered all over. Bags, food wrappers, a water bottle, a flashlight, and just a bunch of other junk. Everything was oddly in almost a perfect line though, following this hollow divot in the sand. Like something had been dragged through the sand and the loose items had fallen out as it went. And this dragging streak ended right up at the edge of the water. I stood there staring at it for a long moment. The drag marks were deep. Whatever had been pulled through the sand was heavy. The width suggested a person. I looked out at the lake. The water was calm and still, no ripples or waves. The surface was like glass, perfectly reflecting the morning sky. It gave me an eerie, uneasy feeling. I couldn't shake the image of something, or someone, being dragged into that water. I left and walked quickly back to my campsite, nervously checking my surroundings the whole way back. Every snapping twig made me jump. Every shadow between the trees looked like it was moving. I felt better, or safer I guess, once I was back near my tent. I really didn't know what to make of everything, but in my head, I thought it was best not to think about it too hard and risk getting paranoid. That would only make things worse. So I distracted myself with making lunch and thinking about other things. I refueled the campfire before it got dark and sat around it, trying to read a book by the firelight. About an hour into the night though, I realized I had forgotten to collect a stash of sticks to keep the fire going with. The fire was getting lower and I didn't want it to go out completely. So I got up and walked the perimeter of my campsite, grabbing any small dry sticks off the ground. And that's when I heard a voice. A quiet whisper from the dark just ahead of me. I didn't have a flashlight on me, and it was pitch dark out there beyond the fire's glow. And the voice was quick and quiet, not long enough for me to know exactly where it came from or even what they said. It didn't feel like they were talking to me though. It felt like someone talking to someone else. Like there were multiple people out there. I got a little spooked and ran back to the campfire, dropping half the sticks I'd collected. As the minutes passed, I tried to reason with myself that it couldn't have been a person, that the wind had just made a strange whisper-like sound through the trees. But when I remembered the scream from last night, when I thought about those drag marks ending at the water, I could no longer convince myself with all these excuses that I was safe. Someone was out there, watching my campsite. And based on what I'd found at the lake, they'd already done something terrible. I stayed outside by the fire for another hour trying to think over my options of what to do. Although really there were only two real options. Stay and hope whoever is out there leaves me alone until morning, or leave in the middle of the night. At the time, leaving in the middle of the night seemed like a worse idea. It would mean hiking 2 miles in complete darkness back to my car. Allowing whoever was out there to follow me or get close to me without me being able to see them, leaving myself completely vulnerable. So if they really did have bad intentions, I'd only be helping them by walking out into the dark alone. But when I went out to collect sticks earlier, I didn't get enough to last before hearing the whisper and running back. And now the fire was getting lower again. I got up and walked to the edge of the firelight, beginning to reach down and grab more sticks. I got maybe another hour's worth of wood before I heard that voice again. This time I had been smart enough to bring my flashlight with me, so I quickly shined it in the direction of the voice. It was very underwhelming though. The light was almost useless, not reaching far enough and not brightening the area as much as I thought it would. The beam just got swallowed up by the darkness. After a few seconds, I got scared again and ran back to the campfire. I tossed the sticks in the fire and made sure it stayed lit. The nerves kept building. I was genuinely fearing for my life and trying to keep it together. I mean, by this point, I'd put together the scream, the scattered items, the drag marks ending at the lake, and now the voices outside of my camp. Multiple voices. Someone had been killed out here. Or at least hurt badly and dragged into the water. And whoever did it was still here. In these woods. Watching me. I got increasingly tired, but I didn't let my eyes rest for even a moment. I stayed up and every hour I had to walk the border of my camp and get more wood for the campfire. And almost every time I'd hear voices out in the dark. Soft whispering back and forth. I counted 3 or 4 distinct voices, like they were alerting each other of what I was doing. His getting more wood. His still awake. His not leaving. It was very unsettling. They wanted me to know they were there. They wanted me scared. The last 2 hours of the night though, when I went out, I didn't hear anything. Complete silence. Which was somehow worse. And finally, when the sun came up and I could see no one was out there in the immediate area around my camp, I packed and hurried down the trail. I didn't break down my tent properly. I just stuffed everything into my backpack and got out of there. The trail went in the same general direction as where the voices had come from, so I stayed alert. And I found several scattered footprints in the dirt around the area. Fresh prints. Multiple sets. All leading in different directions through the trees. But I have no way to know if it was from the people I was hearing last night, or if it was from the person I'd heard screaming, or even just other hikers from previous days. I made it out and honestly, I don't have any answers for what was happening in those woods. When I got back to my car, I called the police. Told them everything. About the scream, the drag marks, the scattered belongings at the lake. They said they'd send someone out to investigate. I never heard back from them. I called 3 times over the next 2 weeks asking for updates. They said they'd looked into it but found nothing conclusive. No missing persons reports matching the timeline. No evidence of foul play at the lake. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. Someone screamed in those woods. Someone was dragged to that lake. And multiple people were watching me all night, deciding what to do with me. I still don't know why they let me leave. Story 2, The Slow Walker. This was about a year ago on my first time camping at a backcountry site, not at a designated campground. I still considered myself a fairly experienced camper because I did everything any other camper would do. The only difference is I didn't have to hike out to anywhere and there would usually be a lot more people around at the campgrounds I'd been to before. Some people would have their whole elaborate campsite set up with tables and everything, but I always kept it minimal. Just a tent, sleeping bag, and the essentials. Eventually, I got the urge to go camp somewhere on my own, not around a ton of people, and get to experience more of the quiet nature side of camping. The trail I chose was in Olympic National Forest in Washington. It was a 3-mile hike to the backcountry campsite. There weren't too many pictures online, but from what I could find, it seemed good enough. I started the hike a few hours after the sun came up in the morning. The parking lot was empty though. It wasn't much of a parking lot at all. More like a small dirt pull-off area on the side of the road. That should have been my first warning sign. It was a Saturday in July. There should have been other cars. Everything went well for the first little bit. It was honestly just a regular hike into the woods. The trail was well maintained, clearly marked. But about 40 minutes into the hike, I saw a man on the trail ahead of me. He was far down the path, moving through the trees. But after just a minute or two, I'd basically caught up to him. This guy was walking incredibly slow. I'm not trying to say that in a mean way, but more so like the guy was purposefully walking astronomically slow. Like 1 step every 3 or 4 seconds slow. Usually, I wouldn't want to pass anyone going in the same direction and would instead just take a breather and walk slower myself to let them get further ahead. But he was going so slow that I kind of had no choice but to pass him. It would have taken me an hour to cover the remaining distance at his pace. I casually said, "Excuse me," as I started to walk around him on the trail. But when I got next to him, he suddenly started walking at a normal pace, matching my speed exactly and asking me how my day was going. I looked over, really confused at first at how weird this was. 1 second he's barely moving, the next he's walking normally. But then the guy reached out his hand for a handshake and said his name was Marcus. I shook his hand and we started a conversation. I wasn't opposed to talking to anyone, but it was just the way in which it started that made me feel off about the whole thing, at least at first. Once we were talking though, Marcus seemed like a normal, chill guy. Mid-40s maybe, fit, experienced hiker from the look of him. We talked for the next 30 minutes as we hiked. I noticed he didn't have a backpack on and asked why, and he said he was actually already set up and was just going for a walk at the moment. He said he had made his campsite in the trees a little ways past the designated camping area where I was headed. Said he preferred to camp off-trail where it was quieter. At some point I mentioned that I was new to this type of backcountry camping. Marcus said he'd been to this place a bunch of times and that it was perfect for a newcomer. Then he said if I wanted, I could come by his campsite later and have dinner around his fire. Said he was cooking venison steaks. I agreed, thinking it'd be cool and could be a great way to make a new camping friend. Meeting people on trails wasn't unusual, and he seemed knowledgeable. When we got to the designated camping area, I started setting up my stuff, and Marcus continued walking past it into the trees to his campsite. I couldn't see it from where I was set up, but I assumed it was just a few minutes further into the forest. The rest of the day, about 6 or 7 hours, I was completely alone at the campsite. No signs of Marcus or any other campers or hikers coming through the area. It wasn't until the sun started going down that Marcus came out of the trees and walked up to my camp area. He asked me how everything was going and we talked for a few minutes. Casual stuff. Then he asked if I wanted to come over to his fire and have something to eat. I said sure and followed him away from my tent and into the trees. I did have a feeling in the back of my head that this was a bit strange, knowing I just met this guy and was now following him deeper into the forest off-trail. But I felt like I would have been able to read if he was a weird guy. Aside from the slow walking situation earlier, he didn't seem weird at all. I walked behind him for about 7 or 8 minutes, getting much deeper into the woods than I was expecting. We were definitely off any kind of trail now. Before I could see his campfire glowing through the trees, I started to feel uneasy. We'd been walking a long time. Too long for a campsite that was supposedly a little ways past the camping area. Finally, we came to a small clearing. And something immediately put me off. Marcus wasn't alone. There were 3 other men sitting at the campsite around the fire. He had never mentioned them. Not once in our entire conversation. Not that I had asked, but I thought it was really weird he never brought it up, especially after inviting me over for dinner. They all greeted me though. One said his name was Derek. Another said Paul. The third didn't give his name, just nodded. And now I was already too deep in the woods to bring up how weird this was or to leave without making things uncomfortable and potentially dangerous. So I sat down next to all of them on a log they'd positioned around the fire. The men weren't cooking anything fancy, just some foil packets with what Marcus said was venison and potatoes, cooking in the coals. The first few minutes were fine. We all just talked. You know, casual small talk about hiking and camping. But after that, things got quiet. Marcus was the one tending the fire and moving the foil packets around. The rest of us were just sitting there. The forest had gotten quiet and dark as well. It was like the forest was telling me something was wrong. Every time I would look up at the men, their eyes would shift away from me. Like I'd caught them watching. Studying me. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. None of them had any camping gear visible. No tents. No sleeping bags. No backpacks. Just the fire and the logs to sit on. "Hey, I'm going to head back to my camp to grab something from my bag," I said, trying to sound casual. "Save me some food though. I'll be right back." I said it in the most casual way possible to not make it too obvious I was trying to leave and not come back. Marcus didn't even look up. He just continued poking the fire with a stick like I hadn't said anything. The other 3 men didn't say a word either. They just looked at me. Their faces completely blank in the firelight. After a very uncomfortable, tense few seconds, I turned around and started to walk away. I only made it a few steps before the eerie silence was interrupted by movement behind me. The sound of someone standing up. I looked back over my shoulder. 2 of the men were now standing, looking right at me. Marcus and the one who hadn't given his name were still sitting. I didn't look for too long before continuing to walk away, trying not to break into a run. The next minute, as I was walking further away into the darkness, I had this horrible, dreadful feeling building behind me. Like I was being followed. I wanted to look, but I was scared. If I looked and they were following me, what would I do? Run? That might trigger them to chase me. Once I got far enough that I could barely see the fire glow anymore, the feeling was too much for me to handle, and I finally did turn around. I was far from their campsite now, but the fire was still visible as an orange glow through the trees. And I could see silhouettes. Multiple silhouettes. Moving between the trees. Following me. All 4 of them were out there. Coming toward me through the forest. I made a dead sprint back toward the camping area where my tent was. I crashed through brush, tripped over roots, branches whipping at my face. When I made it to the designated camping area, I could see my tent in the fading light. I started to take everything down, but the paranoia of not knowing exactly where the men were, possibly being out in the dark somewhere about to jump out at any minute, made me abandon most of my gear. I grabbed my backpack with my essentials, my car keys, and just ran. I followed the trail as fast as I could, using my phone's flashlight. Not stopping until I got all the way back to where I'd parked. As I drove out, shaking and breathing hard, I called the police. I had no real evidence to prove the men were up to something, but I still wanted the police to investigate. I told them everything. About Marcus, about the 4 men, about having to run. They said they'd send someone to check it out. The officer called me back about 2 hours later. They'd driven to the trailhead and walked in about half a mile. They confirmed no other cars were parked anywhere at the trailhead or along the road. Those men had not driven there. Which meant either they'd hiked in from somewhere else, which was possible but unlikely given the remoteness, or they'd been out there for a long time. The officer said they didn't go all the way to the campsite because it was dark and they didn't have enough personnel for a thorough search. They'd come back in the morning. I never heard back about what they found, if anything. But I can't say exactly what those men intended. I just know that when I put everything together, the slow walking to match my pace, the invitation to a campsite deep in the woods, the 3 other men he never mentioned, the lack of any gear, the way they all stood up and followed me when I tried to leave, something really awful was planned for me that night. I never went back to get my tent. Story 3, Sammy. This was around 2017. I had a young, very active German Shepherd mix named Sammy. We did tons of camping and road trips together. This trip wasn't one of our bigger ones though. It was to a state forest just an hour away from my house in Minnesota, at a campsite I'd been to many times. It was my comfort spot where me and Sammy could go to just be alone and relax without needing to drive very far or do too much planning ahead. We left in the morning and got to the campsite around 1 p.m. As soon as we were set up and ready to relax, I quickly noticed Sammy was acting different. She was very familiar with this spot and was always excited and energetic when we got there, but for some reason she wasn't this time. She looked on edge. Ears up, constantly scanning the tree line. Like she could sense something nearby. I looked around and saw nothing. The forest was quiet. Completely dead. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. A good 30 minutes went by before she suddenly relaxed a little and went back to being her typical self, running around and just having a good time being a dog. One thing about Sammy is she has always been extremely protective. So I assumed she might have smelled or heard an animal nearby and went into guard mode. Maybe a bear passing through that was now gone. Anyway, I made her some food and we hung around doing nothing for a few hours. Sammy went exploring a little bit within sight of the camp and played with sticks while I built a campfire and rested. When the sun got lower, I stocked up on firewood and got the fire going a bit heavier to light up the area. Everything was very quiet and calm. Sammy was laying right next to me by the fire and we were both just relaxing when I heard something ahead of us in the trees. I looked up, barely seeing something move near the edge of the clearing. A shadow shifting between 2 trees. And suddenly, Sammy completely lost control. She jumped up and bolted toward it, barking and growling ferociously. I'd never seen her react like that before. Not even to bears or other dogs. I jumped up and yelled at her to stop, to come back. But she was dead set on chasing whatever it was. I ran after her. The sun wasn't fully down yet, but shadows covered everything and made it very difficult to navigate or see anything clearly. After just a few seconds, I could hardly see her through the trees. And after 30 seconds, her bark started to fade out into the distance. And within a minute, she was gone. Just completely gone. I barely had any time to even process what happened. I didn't know what it was that I saw, whether it was a person or an animal or something else entirely. I kept running in the direction she went though, hoping she'd lose interest in whatever she was chasing and come back to me. I was confident she could navigate her way back to me just through scent, but I was more scared of her actually catching up to something she couldn't handle. And my concern grew as the minutes passed by and the forest grew even darker and quieter. The sun was basically fully set now and I didn't have a chance to grab my flashlight when I chased after her. So I had to make the difficult decision to go back to camp before I got myself lost, and to grab a light and do this the smart way. I really hoped she would just run back on her own, but I also couldn't just sit there and anxiously wait for her knowing she could be in trouble. I got my flashlight and my phone, and retraced my steps back into the forest. I called out her name over and over, hearing my voice echo through the trees. "Sammy. Come here, girl. Sammy." I never even heard the slightest bark in response. I was out there for over an hour. I didn't venture too far from camp, staying within a mile in the area that I was familiar with, confident enough that I wouldn't get lost. And then my light picked up something small on the ground, reflecting back at me. I walked closer. It was Sammy's dog tag on her collar, laying in the dirt and leaves. It looked like it had been ripped off of her. The metal ring that attached it to her collar was bent open. Of course, I quickly began thinking the worst. Had she gotten into a fight with something? A bear? A cougar? But just a moment later, I moved my light around the area and found Sammy. She was laying down near a tree about 20 feet away. She was alive, but shaking and terrified. When my light hit her, she didn't even get up. She just looked at me with these wide, scared eyes. She wouldn't even move when I called her. I had to walk over and physically pick her up. She's 60 pounds, not a small dog, but I carried her. I had to carry her the first quarter mile before she was even willing to walk on her own. Something had happened out there. Something that had scared her so badly she was paralyzed with fear. And I was terrified to find out what. I was just thankful she was alive and didn't seem to be physically injured. No blood, no visible wounds. The plan was as soon as we got back to camp to pack everything up and leave right in the middle of the night for both of our safety. Sammy walked close next to me, pressed against my leg, as we navigated through the dark. Finally I could see the fire glowing between the trees. But when we got closer, it was apparent that something was very wrong. The campsite was ransacked. My tent was ripped up and destroyed. The fabric was torn to shreds. My backpack was emptied with all its contents thrown across the site. Food scattered everywhere. My sleeping bag had been pulled out of the tent and was laying in the dirt. I shined my light around frantically and didn't see anyone or anything, but I was horrified. This wasn't an animal. Animals don't rip apart tents like that. They might tear into them looking for food, but this was systematic. Destructive. I quickly gathered up what I could from the ground and threw it back into my bag. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely zip it. I only managed to get maybe half of what was scattered around before I noticed Sammy. She had stopped walking. She was frozen in place, staring into the dark trees on the far side of the clearing. Her ears were flat against her head. The fur on her back was standing up. And she was growling low in her throat. I didn't even look to see what she was looking at. I just grabbed her by the collar and we left everything else behind. The walk back to my truck was just over an hour on the trail. Sammy stayed quiet and timid alongside me the whole way. I kept my flashlight moving, scanning the trees on both sides of the trail. And I don't think we were followed. But considering how well hidden whoever was out there was, considering they destroyed my camp while I was looking for my dog, it's hard to know for sure. We got back to the truck and I'd never felt such relief in my life. I locked the doors immediately. We went back home and I avoided that campsite for years after. Sammy got better after just a few days. She actually wasn't injured or harmed physically in any way. So the way her collar was ripped from her still has me really confused. It wasn't broken. The ring was pried open. By hands, not teeth. Someone had taken it off her. I mentioned this happened back in 2017. Sammy actually passed away a couple of years ago from cancer. She was 14. In the grief, I guess I wanted to go back to that campsite. For answers or comfort or closure or whatever. I went alone. During the day, the campsite looked exactly the same. Like nothing had ever happened there. Nothing happened during my visit and I didn't find anything. No evidence. No answers. So what really happened that night is still entirely unknown. But I think about it all the time. I think about what Sammy saw that scared her so badly. I think about what she was chasing. I think about who ripped her collar off without hurting her. And I think about who destroyed my camp while I was out in the woods looking for her. Almost like they were waiting for me to leave. Like they'd use something to lure Sammy away so I'd follow. So they could go through my things. Or worse. I'll never know.